My name is Susan Storm, and I'm the founder of Psychology Junkie. And today I want to talk about why it took so long for me to figure out my personality type and why it's okay if it's taking you a really long time to figure out your personality type. I have been writing about typology for 8 years, and I've been an MBTI certified practitioner for 7 years. And my journey of figuring out my true best fit personality type has taken a really, really long time. Along the way, I have thought initially that I was an INFJ personality type. That's what I would get on the official MBTI. And when I went to get certified through the MBTI training program, when I spoke with my instructor, INFJ just seemed like the best fit type, even though there was something inside me that felt like, I don't know, am I doing this right? Do I really have this right? I'm not 100% sure. So I went along with INFJ for quite a number of years. And then over time, it just felt more and more and more like it wasn't fitting quite right. And I spoke to Linda Behrens, who is a really amazing type expert. She's also a psychologist, and she has a training program where she teaches people all about type and through these different lenses. And part of taking her program is having a one-on-one consultation with her. Through that process, she didn't say, hey, you're not an INFJ. She just suggested very nicely that I would look at NT personality types a little more closely as a possibility. So after doing that, I looked at those types, I considered it, I still wasn't really sure. And then I talked to my friend Antonia Dodge, who is one of the co-founders of Personality Hacker. And she said, well, she'd already always kind of seen NT in me. And then she conducted kind of a offhand profiling session that was very casual, and she is not the kind of person to push a personality type on somebody at all. And so she was very careful about it. But she said also that she was seeing NTJ preferences. So then she recommended I get a consultation with their top profiler, Melissa Harris, who also said ENTJ. All these people that I spoke with are very well versed in type. They really know their stuff. I have a huge amount of respect for them. And ENTJ was like such a wildly different type than I had ever considered, because I in no way felt extroverted. The ENTJs I knew were very outspoken, much more quickly than I am as a person, and much more blunt and directive than I am as a person. And so I really had a hard time initially buying that. But over time, I started seeing where I was using a lot of extroverted thinking in my daily life. And I started seeing that introverted feeling was more my natural mode of processing as opposed to extroverted feeling. So I went with it. I said, ENTJ, that's what the experts are saying. And I can see how this is matching up in these different ways. So I will do that. But then over time, and I know some of you are shaking your heads, it's okay. Over time, I was like realizing that I know that extroversion in Myers-Briggs isn't just about being chatty and social, right? It's not the same thing as social extroversion, but I am not operating in the same way as I see other ENTJs operating. I very much prefer the inner world. I cannot interact externally as rapidly as ENTJs are doing, along with the fact that I felt like introverted feeling was higher for me than inferior. And I still struggled a lot with the issues that I had when I thought I was an INFJ, which were inferior extroverted sensing responses. I struggle a lot with keeping up with being in the moment, being present, paying attention to a lot of details. I struggle a lot with interruptions and sensory overload and things like that. Whereas my introverted feeling side feels like more of a strength to me. This is an area that I honor in my life. And it's an area that I feel is a way that I want to be taken care of, which if you're familiar with John Beebe's 8-function model, it's very common for types with introverted feeling in the tertiary position. And my husband also was really chiming in and saying, INTJ like makes a way more sense to me for you than ENTJ. There's no way you have inferior introverted feeling. There's no way you're an extrovert. And so over time and a lot of thought, and also attending Personality Hackers 5-day profiling training program, which is really good, by the way, I really came to terms with the fact that I think INTJ is the best fit type. So the shift was really more INFJ to INTJ versus INFJ to ENTJ. Now, I am completely aware that this sounds super flaky. Like listening to myself, I feel like I sound incredibly flaky and unreliable as a person. Like, wow, how could you get your type so mixed up? I mean, you're someone who writes about this every single day. You're someone who has been a MBTI certified practitioner for years. How can it be so hard for you to figure out your personality type? You must be like a real airhead. And I've gotten actually emails like that from people, quite a few. And you are totally okay to think that. I've definitely had the same thoughts about myself. But today I want to talk about why it can be so hard for certain people to really land on their best fit type and why it can be so confusing. Because I think sometimes you can feel like if you tell people, hey, I'm an INFJ, and then years later you're like, oh, actually, sorry guys, I'm an INFP. There's some shame involved in that, especially if you're like a public figure into the type community, but even just everyday people, there can be some shame in that. And people in the type community can be kind of jerky a lot of times, especially about like calling people out on being mistyped and thinking they know people better than they know themselves, and really coming up with these bizarre reasons why people are not who they say they are. So I think this is important for me to share as someone who people read my blog. They look to me for answers about type. And so I've always felt like being authentic and transparent about my process is very important. Simultaneously, it's always been very important for me not to infuse my writing with my own life story. I always felt some uncertainty around my Myers-Briggs personality type. In fact, I wrote a blog article back in 2017 that's called Why It's Okay Not to Know Your Personality Type. And I've spoken quite a few times on Twitter and other social platforms about how even I don't feel sure about my type in the past. So if you consistently read my content, you'll know that I have been fairly open about not being sure. But it's still, I've wanted to be open about this journey so that people feel like they can also be open about similar things. And also just because it doesn't feel right to me to present one thing and be another. But at the same time, I've tried very hard not to write articles where I'm saying, because I'm an INFJ, therefore all INFJs are like me. Or because I'm an ENTJ, therefore all ENTJs are like me. Or because I'm an INTJ, all INTJs are like me. It's been very important for me not to do that because I realized that type is just a small part of how someone shows up in the world and who someone is. And so if I start saying all INTJs are like me, then and I start putting my own experience into it in a way that isn't even consistent with type, I can lead a whole bunch of people down the wrong path. So there are things that are consistent for types. If you are an INTJ, then you have a preference for the inner world first. And you are going to assess the inner world before you're reacting to the external world. And you are going to consider extroverted thinking criteria when you have to make a decision. That's the first thing you're going to consider, and then you'll get to the introverted feeling realm. Sometimes you might consider introverted feeling first, but ordinarily extroverted thinking is going to come first. So there are some consistencies across type. But I don't think it's a value for me to be like, I'm an INTJ, so here's my journey, and I bet you're like me. Because then I feel like there's too much room for misinterpretation and there's too much room to confuse people. And there's a lot of things we just have in common as humans that are not related to type. And so I can lead people down the wrong rabbit hole if I'm starting to say, infuse too much of my writing with here's who I am, and therefore here's what other people of this type might be. So that said, I have had people reach out to me and be like, you have no integrity. You wrote a book about INFJs, and then you found out you weren't one. So nobody should ever have listened to you, and you've ripped people off and all this kind of thing. I want to say right now, if you ever bought a book from me, or if you ever were profiled by me and you feel like my self-discovery of trying to figure out who I am impacted the credibility of what I provided to you, whether it was a book or a profiling session, reach out to me, give me your order number, and I will refund you. I'm just saying that right here and now. I have no interest in ripping anyone off, and if it really impacted you, then let me know. I did not put any of my personal experience into the books that I wrote. It was the books that I write, I'm very careful to put all my research into my content. So I have 70 books about personality type at my desk here. And then I've taken lots of different certification programs as well. So when I write about type, I'm using those resources. I'm not using my self-understanding to write about type. So when I wrote the book about INFJs, I wasn't going, what am I like as an INFJ? Okay, let me write this in the book. That had nothing to do with it. It was, what has all my research shown me about INFJs? How have I been trained to identify INFJs? What in my training has taught me about the struggles of INFJs? And then that is what I'm going to synthesize and create a book out of, rather than here's my own life story as an INFJ. So if you decide to purchase the book from me, thank you. It helps me provide for my family. But if you ever got a book from me and you feel like the fact that I figured out I was mistyped has negatively impacted what you got out of the book, then I'm more than happy to refund your money if you can give me an order number. On to the next thing. So why can it take some people so long to figure out their personality type? Why is it so confusing and overwhelming to people? There's a lot of reasons why this can happen. So, one big reason can be dysfunction or trauma in your childhood. So sometimes if you are a survivor of childhood trauma or just trauma in your life, you develop all these coping mechanisms in order to get through your life, in order to survive. And when you've gone through a lot of dysfunction and trauma in your life, you can get really mixed up about what is you versus what is your coping mechanism. And that was something that was very difficult for me. I feel like when I say I had a traumatic childhood and some traumatic experiences in my life that really impacted me, I feel like that's something kind of everyone is experiencing to some degree. I feel like I almost never meet someone who doesn't have traumatic experiences. But those experiences brought about very specific coping mechanisms for me. And I adopted this survivor mentality and way of getting through life for a very long time that didn't feel authentic. It didn't actually feel like me, but it is how I coped with things. And if you also are watching this and you've had traumatic childhood or trauma even as an adult, and you made this kind of seismic shift in your personality in order to survive, you'll understand exactly what I'm talking about, where you're trying to parse out who am I really versus who did I become in order to get through the day and do what I need to do and survive my life, essentially. And so that for me was a very difficult thing. It was something I was open about with the people who were trying to profile me. Was I don't know if I do this because of this dysfunction, or I don't know if I do this because it's actually natural to who I am. So some people are struggling to type themselves because they are not sure about what's them and what's a trauma response or a coping mechanism. And another thing that made it difficult for me was I became a mom really young. So I was 20 when I had my first child. And I was a single mom for 6 years. Then I got married and had 4 more children. So from a very young age, my life became about taking care of other people. And that was my life, taking care of my children, struggling as a single mom to make enough money to take care of myself, to take care of my daughter, to do it, to just survive in that situation. And then having more children. And if you're watching this and you're a parent, you totally know when you become a parent, especially if you have a large family, your time is extremely devoted to caretaking. Doesn't matter what your personality type is, you're going to spend a huge amount of time assessing your children's emotions, taking care of practical realities, strategizing for the future, having to pay attention to all kinds of things that you might not ordinarily pay attention to otherwise. You also realize you have this abundance of emotion for the children, abundance of love for them. And you're married, and then you've got another human being to take care of, and they influence you as well. So if you are struggling to figure out your personality type and you're a parent, it may be hard for you to figure out what is mom or dad me and what is actual me. And that's a very real struggle. In fact, when you take the official Myers-Briggs type indicator, they say try not to think of who you are as a mom or what you're like as a dad or what you're like at work when you answer these questions. Try to think of who you are when you're not wearing a hat, essentially. The problem was for me, I was always wearing a hat. It felt like my whole life, I felt like I was wearing different hats to achieve different things. It was, I need to be, as a kid, I really need to be able to read people's emotions so that I can avoid getting hurt or someone else can avoid getting hurt. Because if I can't read people's emotions, then there might be abuse involved. And as a mom, then it's, well, I really need to take care of this child, and this child, and this child. This child needs one thing, and this child needs another thing, and that child needs another thing. And I also was self-employed while having all these kids. And so there's managing budgets, and there's taking care of meals, and there's trying to run a business. And even before I had Psychology Junkie as my blog, I was running content marketing for other businesses while I was having babies and taking care of them and not sleeping at night. So I had no time for a lot of figuring myself out. My life has been, most of my life, very focused on achieving the things on my task list. And I became primarily interested in personality type as a way to understand others better so that I could be more efficient and effective in my ways of interacting with other people. I have always found people a little bit confusing. I've always been kind of an outsider. I've never been part of a big community. I've never had a whole lot of friends. So I struggled a lot in my life with feelings of loneliness and feeling like I don't really fit in anywhere. And, if I could just crack the code of how people work, well, then I'd really have something valuable. And so that's what got me into personality type. Was there was this neatly organized system for understanding how people work and how their minds work. And if I can really understand this system, then I can communicate with people so much better. I can feel like I'm less of an outsider. I can develop rules for interactions. I can create guidelines for how not to annoy people or how to be happier or how to encourage people. And that was really the inspiration for my blog. Was I started writing all these articles, what stresses out each of the personality types, what annoys each of the personality types, what makes the personality types happy, what they look for in a relationship. And I didn't get this information from my own brain. I wish I was that insightful about all the people of the universe, but I'm really just a very nerdy adult who never really got a chance to be a kid. And this is my way to have fun. So I read a lot of material. I worked as an MBTI practitioner, and I took a lot of training programs, and I just synthesized that data into my mind and could come up with the content that I write. And using the data that I knew about the different types, I would imagine this is probably how they would react to certain things. And then I would send my articles to these lists of people of certain types. So I have segmented email lists organized by their different personality types. So I have an email list of ISTJs and an email list of ENFPs and an email list of Enneagram 3s and Enneagram 7s. And when I write an article, I often will send it to the list and say, hey, does this check out? Do you have any disagreements with what I'm writing here? And it's a lot of work to do that, but I feel like it's important because it keeps me from going too much into my imagination and trusting that to a degree where maybe it's not actually grounded in reality. Because like I said, I'll read all this content, I'll get all this training, then I'll synthesize it into here's probably what each personality type would hate in a relationship, right? And then I'll write that out. And I don't want to trust that too much, that my idea of what they would probably do is right. That's why I double check it against these different email lists and I ask for input. Often the stuff that I write is so grounded in all the training I've received that it checks out with people. But sometimes I do have to make modifications and changes because I am not perfect. So where was I going? I feel like I lost my train of thought. So my interest in type, what I started writing about was stuff I wished I could find and things I wished I had known growing up, because I always felt like I was outside looking at groups of people interacting and looking at friends interacting, going, how are they doing that? I don't understand. Like, that seems so complicated. Why are people so confusing? I always feel like I don't belong. And if I had had these tools, well, then surely I would not have had that experience. And so I wanted to offer that to other people. So when I created Psychology Junkie, it was in no way in an effort to get money or like be seen as some kind of thought leader. It was really actually a way for me to organize my thoughts about type and my research about type in very practical ways. So I felt back in 2015, there just really wasn't a lot of practical resource for type. A lot of it was very more emotion driven, like here's why you feel this way, and much more like subjective emotional exploration rather than practical application. And so that should have been my first clue that I probably have TJ references, because I was annoyed at the lack of practical application for anything typology related. So I thought if I wrote about type that I would give people something that I could have always used and that I might be able to help some people. And then at the same time, my husband was in the military. I mean, we had a bunch of kids and it was a little crazy. Like, I was making homemade bread to save money and not have to buy bread at the store. We were using cloth diapers to save money. I mean, we were really fairly poor. We were okay. We were fairly content, but we're also fairly poor. And I was doing content marketing for other businesses. And I realized that my Psychology Junkie blog was getting a lot of traffic. And if I could monetize that by putting ads on my blog, then I could maybe buy actual diapers or, not have to worry so much about trying to stay within this really small budget for groceries. And I figured, well, if I'm giving people practical information that's helping them, if they have to scroll past a few ads, then I suppose that's not really a big deal. They're getting free information and I worked hard to make it. So that was essentially how Psychology Junkie went from being just my passion project to something that now does provide for my family. I'm not uber wealthy by any stretch of the imagination. I still have a very specific budget, just like anyone else. And, anyway, that's not really what concerns you if you're here. But that's my story. Now, has knowing about type made me this social engineer who perfectly interacts with other people? No, absolutely not. I went to this 5-day profiler training for personality hacker, which was amazing. I mean, they do a really good job. I felt so awkward almost the entire time. And all those same feelings of being an outsider were still there, even though people were so kind. So knowing typology, even though I kind of thought, well, if I could crack this code, I will be socially so much better than I was before. And I will feel like I belong somewhere because I can understand how people take better. It doesn't fix all your problems because type is, again, just a small part of who you are as a person. There is so much more psychologically to who someone is. There are attachment styles. There's Enneagram type. There's internal family systems. There's, codependency and trauma responses and so many things. There are just individual values that make people different. And so you can have 100 different INTJs or INFJs or ESFPs, and they can all look extremely different from each other. So it can take a long time to figure out what are someone's actual preferences, what are their actual cognitive functions, and where are they in the stack. This is one reason why I don't believe in quick 1 hour typing consultations. I don't believe in that because I feel like when you first meet someone, you're going to get a lot of persona and not a lot of personality. You're going to get a lot of who they feel like they need to present themselves to be before you can get to who they actually are. If anyone says they can type someone in 15 minutes or 5 minutes, they are very mistaken, in my personal opinion. It can take a really long time to find your personality type. And that's one thing I appreciated a lot about Linda Barron's is when she does consultations with people, she does not rush through the process, and she does not promise that she will tell you this is what you are at the end of it. She will really take her time, and she doesn't type based on behavior. Behaviors can be developed for many reasons, and they are not often just because of your personality type. One reason that I can look like an extroverted thinker dominant type, an ENTJ, is because I work a lot. I'm very busy. From the time I get up in the morning till the time I go to bed, I am usually working very hard on a task list. and taking care of my family and taking care of my job and taking care of all these different things. That does not make me an ENTJ. It does make me someone who's got a big family and a lot of responsibility, who has a personal value of responsibility and who takes their family's needs very seriously. And I've seen a lot of people type other people based on their behaviors, and it's very easy to do. It's the hardest thing not to do when you are conducting a profiling session with somebody. But getting to the core of who someone actually is takes a lot more time. And I think, honestly, a lot of self-reflection on the person's part. So if you're trying to figure out your type and you're looking at getting coaching or getting a consultation with someone, definitely do that. But don't feel like you have to have it figured out in an hour. It took me, let's see, it's 2023. I think I first took the Myers-Briggs type indicator back in 2009. So it's taken me 14 years to find my best fit type. And that's because of all the things I mentioned. If you're someone who's so driven by all these things you have to do that you don't actually have time to really think through what's the underlying motivations for all these things and what cognitive processes am I using all the time, then it can be very difficult for you to find out who you are. Now, maybe you got to the end of this and you still feel like I'm just as flighty as you did at the beginning. That's okay. Again, like I said, every once in a while, I think that's about myself. But one value that's very important to me as a person is openness to being wrong and being open to admitting when you have misunderstood something or when you are wrong. And I was wrong about being an INFJ. And I'm okay with that because I just have learned a lot in the process of figuring out who I am. And that understanding and knowledge is only going to help me more in the future. And I hope that you can be open with yourself and okay with yourself if you need time to figure out who you are, because it's really confusing and life is really messy. And we don't all have hundreds of hours in a month to just figure ourselves out. So I hope this has been helpful. And I hope this gives you a bit more understanding of where I'm coming from in regards to my own type, if that was important to you. But thank you for tuning in, and stay tuned for more type content in the future. I'll talk to you later.